Hey you guys, Joel Viets here of DeepWater Tanks. So in last week's episode, I covered like a pretty good breadth of knowledge, but I didn't go very in depth with it. That was to kind of get your feet wet and get you thinking on what you want, what you're interested in, and just get the gears to working as far as where you want to go with this hobby. So today what we're going to do is we're going to build off of some of that knowledge. We're going to focus in on a few things. We're going to go a little bit more in depth, so you have an idea of what it is you may be interested in or not interested in. Now I'm going to do that in a two-part series for us. The first part of that will be, we're going to talk about the filters and the equipment needed for running the tank. The reason this is important is when it comes to a lot of this stuff, like I don't expect you guys to go out and buy the most expensive piece of equipment out there, but I'm trying to keep you from buying possibly the wrong piece of equipment. Now this is important because say you go to buy a new hang-on back filter for your tank, and there's a $20 one or the Cadillac $35 version. The $20 one may seem like the budget-friendly idea, but in 6 months, if that dies and then you have to buy a new $20 one, you've already invested more than the really nice filter was worth. I'm a quality over quantity kind of guy, so what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to teach you from some of my mistakes, so you're not having to invest your time and money in making these mistakes, and you can learn from mine. So it will be better for you in the long run. Now, in no way, shape, or form am I sponsored by any of these companies or brands or products. It'd be super cool if I was. I mean, I think we all think it'd be cool if people would give us free stuff like that, but I'm buying it just like you guys are. So what you're going to get from me is just my opinions on what and why you should get it. So the second part of this will be talking about the fish. I want to kind of stoke those fires of interest in you, and you can see what you like or what you don't like. We're going to do this by talking about 3 different aquariums that I own. So let's jump right in. So for this first tank, it's a 5-gallon shrimp tank. It started as a quarantine tank for some of my others. White sand, beautiful rocks, kind of a bonsai tree wrapped in Java moss, and a little bit of Amazon frogbit in this tank. Love it, love it, love it. Now for the equipment for this tank, I have an Eheim heater. It's the smallest version and the smallest one they've got to make it fit in the tank. I have a sponge filter for dealing with some of the mechanical and biological filtration, ran off of a Tetra air pump. Now I have it turned down pretty far because I don't need it to be a wave pool in there. Now for the hang-on back filter I run, realistically these aren't necessary, but Java moss grows better in a tank with current. For whatever reason, it just likes the current. That helps push nutrients across it. It helps it grow a little faster. Now for that aquarium filter, that hang on back, as I said, it's an Aqueon Quiet Flow 10. Now, as great of a little filter as it is, the problem with running it on a small tank where you're breeding shrimp and guppies is the fry and the shrimplets will get sucked up the filter and blended up. So to keep that from being an issue, I have a pre-filter sponge on the tank. Now, if you just look up pre-filter sponge on Amazon, you'll find a million of these. You just have to find the right one that fits your tank. So these do a great job at protecting and saving the fish and the livestock you've got, so they don't get sucked up and eaten. So the last thing I have on this tank as far as equipment goes is I have a Haiger 9-watt full spectrum LED light. Now this light is crucial because the plants in the tank need the right spectrum of light to grow. Any aquarium you ever have, you'll struggle with this at one point, and that is algae. If you have the wrong kind of light or too much light, you're going to have algae problems. So having the correct light is a crucial thing for keeping your plants healthy and algae growth in check. Now there's one more piece of equipment I almost forgot to tell you about, and this is probably one of my favorite pieces of equipment, and it's going to sound really dumb, but here's why it's crucial. The B-N-Link heavy duty timers. These guys are troopers, and I have them on pretty well all of my tanks that need a light. These timers are crucial. You can get them in a 2-pack on Amazon for like 20-25 bucks dead most. The reason I love these, 1, they're heavy duty, so they have the ground plug, so you can run different equipment on them. 2, they're fairly easy to program. Once you get used to programming them, it's pretty straightforward and pretty easy to adjust the time. Like when daylight savings time hits, it's not that bad. You just know which button to hit and everything works out. And 3, this is my favorite feature of this, they have like a built-in battery. So when the power in your house goes out, these things hold the time and hold the programming. Most every other timer on the market or light on the market that has a built-in timer, when that happens, they wig out and shut off. If they come back on, you don't know. And if they do come on, it probably resets all the programming for most of them. So the lights are on and off at all different times. And you're like, shoot, now I have to reprogram all of this. These little beautiful things solve that problem. This timer is running the light on this 55 right now. I have it all set up to run everything. So now as far as livestock goes for this 5-gallon tank, I've got 4 or 5 different things in there. We're going to start out with the shrimp. I love shrimp in this tank. I bought 2 dozen red cherry shrimp a couple of years ago from a friend, and they have multiplied to be well over 200. Now they're not all in this tank. They're all through my hydroponics setup. There's some in this tank. They're an easy to take care of shrimp, and they're great at eating algae. Now in my 5-gallon quarantine tank, or if I say quarantine, it's the 5-gallon shrimp tank at this point. They crawl through all the plants and all the rocks, and they eat every bit of algae that they can get a hold of for the most part. There's very few kinds of algae they won't eat, but they do an overall great job. Red cherry shrimp, I think I counted them today, and I had over 50 of them in there, and they're breeding. I have them in all different sizes. Keep the water parameters up. You feed them every other day. They do great, and they love to continuously multiply. The next shrimp that I have in here is the Amano shrimp. Now, Amano shrimp are great for a number of reasons. One, their biggest factor that makes everyone love them is they're phenomenal algae eaters as well. And they get almost 3 inches long. Like, they're probably one of the bigger freshwater shrimp you can get that's harmless for your fish and plants. Cherry shrimp, Amano shrimp, these guys love algae. They won't eat any live plants and tear them up. They won't eat any live fish. If you've got some sort of shrimp that's eating fish, it's probably more of a crawdad or a crayfish than it is a shrimp. So yeah, Amano shrimp is the second one. So now we're going to move on to snails. Now the snails that I have in this tank, I have, I think, 3 different kinds at this point. 2 were intended, 1 was not. The first snail that I've got is nearite snails. Gorgeous little snail. They're a brackish to saltwater snail, and they do not breed or reproduce in freshwater. Now they may lay eggs, but those eggs will not hatch. They're a phenomenal snail for cleaning all hard surfaces. Rocks and glass is where they live. They do a great job. Like, I've taken like time-lapse video of rocks they have cleaned, and it looks amazing. Like, they just move along like little vacuums, and they just clean this stuff off, and you can see perfect clean spots when they're done. Like, you can tell exactly where they've been working. They're not one for crawling through Java moss and that sort of thing, but that's why I have the shrimp. The shrimp cover those. So the next snail I've got for you guys is the Malaysian trumpet snail. Now, Malaysian trumpet snails are great for planted aquariums or any sort of tank that has sand or gravel, because they'll churn through all the substrate. They love to eat anything and everything they come across as far as food or even fish waste a little bit. Now, a lot of times you'll hear me say, nothing likes to eat poop. These are probably the closest thing that will, I guess you could say. When I throw them in my tanks, they do a phenomenal job of cleaning up and kind of churning your substrate, as I said. But here's the thing that makes them a real winner for me. All these plants, they will not eat. Malaysian trumpet snails do not eat plants. They'll eat dying plants, dying plant matter, but they will not get on healthy plants and start eating them. I've had this stuff in here for going on 3 years, and I have Malaysian trumpet snails in here as well, and they do a great job of coming out at night, being the cleanup crew, and then when the daylight hits or the light kicks on in the morning, they burrow back down into the substrate and disappear, and you don't know they're even there. If you want to know if you have Malaysian trumpet snails, throw some fish food in your tank when the lights are off, wait an hour, come back, turn the lights on, and like in this tank, I'd see the bottom crawling with them because there's a ton of them, and I put them in every tank that I can because they do a great job at being a cleanup crew. So the last snail that I have in this 5-gallon shrimp tank upstairs is ram's horn snails. Now, they were an uninvited guest. I have them in some tanks on purpose, but a few of them hitchhiked into my 5-gallon tank, and they do a great job at cleaning, but they're one of those snails that will eat certain plants. Now, they don't eat Java moss. They'll get through it and clean and eat a lot of the algae that wants to grow in there, just like the shrimp will, but they have a real sweet tooth for Amazon frogbit. Where my 5-gallon tank had been producing it like mad and growing and growing and growing, the snails got to it and ate it down to about nothing. So I'm starting kind of fresh with some of that Amazon frogbit. So those are kind of the snails and the shrimp that I have in the tank, but I have two kinds of fish in here. I did breed guppies in here, and I pulled most of them out because they were breeding quickly enough and growing quickly enough. When I found them eating my shrimp, I was like, yeah, we got a problem. You got to go. So they came back to either this tank or back to my aquaponics setup in the garage because it's warm enough I can put them back. Now, the only other fish that I have in this tank temporarily is one of my dwarf pufferfish. BB puffers is one name for them. They are a really cool little fish. They love to eat snails. Now, they don't mess with my Malaysian trumpet snails because they're buried most of the day. And the nearite snails, their shells suction so close on them that when they're on the glass, there's no way these little puffers can get around the edge of the snail to bite the meat or the foot of the snail. So these guys do fine, but what they're there for is they're there to clean out my ram's horn snail infestation. Now I have, as I said, a number of tanks, 500 gallons worth. I have a group of these pufferfish that when I get too many snails in one place, I toss them in the tank and leave them for a week and come back, and they are fat and happy because they've lived it up like it was the best buffet ever. They've thinned that population down to 0 or nearly 0, and I move them on to the next tank or put them back in their tank. Cool little fish, but they are just a temporary one that is there to help me clean up after things get a little out of hand. So the only other thing that's in that tank is I think I have one guppy fry left to get, but that should be it. All right, so now we're going to move on to my 55-gallon planted tank. This one here behind me. You heard me talk about it last week. I'm going to go over some of the same stuff we covered, but it's just a refresher, and I'll try and keep it really quick for you guys. So starting off, the equipment for this tank. The first thing I'm going to list is this ADJ power strip. Now, I absolutely love this, and I have them on every tank I own except for the 5-gallon tank because they make life so much simpler. Maybe it's because I'm a tech nerd and I love switches too, but here's why. Here is exactly why I have these. Here's the filters running. You hear that. Now, when I want to be able to turn the filters off to talk to you guys, or say I'm doing a water change and I need to turn stuff off, I think we're all notorious for getting some of these things, and heaters will blow up and pop and go bad if they're out of the water and they get hot. But this beautiful little power strip, if I need to turn any of that off while I work on it, it's as simple as flipping the switches of what I want turned off. Phenomenal little things. As I said, I think I have 3, if not 4 of them at this point, and they do a great job. Now, they are not made for wet or water use in that purpose or that sense. I try and keep them safely tucked away where they are away from water being able to touch them. It's one of those things that you just kind of have to be careful of and decide if you want to do it, and if you want to drop $40 or $45 for that beautiful little piece of equipment down there. So the next piece of equipment I'm going to cover is for this tank. I've got 2 Aqueon Quiet Flow 75s. There's a filter on each side. That's what you heard kick on just a second ago. They do a great job of pushing water around, churning stuff up and sucking it into the filter intakes. Now, because I have shrimp and guppy fry in here, I also have filter sponges on the intake to keep them from getting sucked in. That's a must if you're trying to have small stuff that you want to breed. It's a lifesaver so you don't lose all the money and effort you put into trying to breed stuff. Now, the reason I like these filters so much is because the motor itself is an internal in-tank pump, where other pumps are outside, like in the hang-on back unit itself. If your power shuts off, a lot of those other brands, they'll dry run because the water will siphon back out of them into the tank. They'll run themselves dry, then they'll actually burn up and die. So say you were gone at work and the power shut off and then kicked back on, some filters can burn themselves out because of that. The reason I love these is they're self-prime and the actual pump is in the tank. there's no chance of it running out of water to pump back into the filter, because your tank would have to be empty for that to happen. So that's the filters. So the next piece of equipment in the back over here, I have an Aqueon heater. I think it's 150 watt. It's done a great job for me. Some models are kind of touch and go, but I've had pretty good equipment with Aqueon stuff. Like, I love their filters. So yeah. So the next thing we're going to touch on is I also have a temperature probe in the tank. Tucked back behind the motor of that filter is the probe, and I have it tied up to where it goes to the outside of the tank where no one sees it. No one wants to have a big old thermometer looking view screen on the front of your tank where it's for display purposes. So I have it stuck on the side. That tells me my temperature of the tank. There's a million brands of these out there. You have to be careful, because when you get them, a lot of them, like I've checked this, they may say they're calibrated, but I've found like 6 degrees of difference on a lot of these thermometers. So they take a little watch battery. They're pretty nice. They do a fairly decent job. If you don't want that and you want the free feature that doesn't require batteries, just get the little stick-on side, like it's a thermometer that sits in your tank and suction cups to the side for like $3. They do a great job as well. Just be careful not to break them. It's either or. They're great. You need one either way, because you need to know your water temperature to maintain it for your fish. Now, the final piece of equipment for this tank is the Haiger 32 watt full spectrum light that I have up above. Now, these lights do a great job. They're supposed to have like a built-in timer feature, but their timer feature is kind of a sad joke in that regard. I hate to say it, sorry guys. Sorry if you love those. The reason that's a bad thing to me is because instead of shutting the light off, they go from whatever the brightest setting is to whatever the dimmest setting is. So the light never actually goes off. The reasons this is bad is because algae, all it needs is water and stuff in the water that's naturally there, and light to grow. To keep algae in check, you need to have a balance of when your lights are on and off. If your lights are on all the time, you're going to have algae problems in one way, shape, or form. So that's why I have that timer on this tank that I showed you, because it turns that light on and off. And when you get it set to where it needs to be, everything runs like you want it to. So, all right, so that's the equipment for this tank. So the next thing we're going to talk about is the fish. Now, I had to make a list of the fish because there's a lot of fish in here, but most all of them are the same thing. As I said before, I've got my red cherry shrimp in here. I've got a nearite snail in here who's going to town cleaning algae. But as far as some of my other fish, I really prefer, I'm not one for throwing chemicals at the tank. So I like working fish that have a purpose. Like, some of my tanks are beautiful fish, some of them are monster fish. This tank is full of working fish. So when it comes to keeping this puppy clean, in here I have a number of algae eaters. Now, for starters, we're going to talk about the American flagfish. Now, this is a personal favorite of mine. They are a killifish of the United States. They're more in the southern regions, Florida, where waters are warm. They get about 3 inches long. The males get some great color to them. If you look them up online, stellar fish. They can be a little nippy. They almost fall into the semi-aggressive category. Honestly, I think they probably do, because the males are territorial, and I've seen them go to town trying to kill shrimp. The males are really bad about this. The reason they're in here for now is they're going to go back in the aquaponics tank once it warms up. But for the time being, they're small enough, they don't have aggression issues in here, and they're helping clean, and they look pretty. So the next fish that I have on this list is the Odosyncolus. Now, these guys are a little suckermouth catfish. They're really finicky about water quality and stress. Now, they're tucked away back in the plants, and they love to hide so much. Like, I will barely ever see them in this tank. Maybe there's a little too much motion and a few too many fish, but they love to be in groups. They do a great job at cleaning hardscapes and keeping algae in check. They love diatom algae, which really isn't an algae, but that's a story for another time. And so they're good at cleaning like your hard surfaces and your plants. They're a good all-around fish, and they'll breed pretty easily if you have a heavily enough planted tank and they aren't stressed. Now, the next fish I have in here is my Siamese algae eater. Now, this guy, I don't know where he's at. Oh, he's right here on the log, kind of scraping along. They are a pretty nifty little fish, and they're one of the few fish that likes to eat blackbeard algae. Now, if you look in here, I do have some blackbeard algae, and they are good about eating it when they're smaller, but they are definitely a semi-aggressive fish as well. When they get bigger, they get big attitudes, they chase stuff, they don't like fish in their territories or their caves, so they'll get nippy, and they don't really bite, but they'll stress fish out, and stress will kill a fish, as we discussed. So he's in here temporarily as well. The next fish on this list is my hillstream loach. Now, I only have one. The pet store was down to one when I went to pick him up, and he is probably the hardest fish for me to try and catch, let alone catch footage of for you guys. I have looked on multiple different occasions over the last few days to catch footage of him for you, to no avail. I'll see a flick of him here or there, but he hides where I cannot see him, and I'm not tearing the tank apart to try and catch one fish picture for you. So yeah, hillstream loaches, look them up. Cool little fish. They are great algae eaters, pretty well all around. They're not one for going through like the Java moss, but they do a good job most everywhere else. So my other fish that I have in here are Pandagara. Now, I really like these guys. A lot of people think they're a species of a loach. They are not. They're more a species of like carp minnows, and they act very loachish. They have a real good personality to them. They're kind of boisterous. They'll put up with a fair amount, and I have two of them in here. Not sure where they are right now, but they do a great job of cleaning along the glass, cleaning hard objects. Now, they don't clean nearly as well as nearite snails, but you add all these good cleaning fish together and they do a pretty good job all around. Like when I go to clean this tank, it's a little bit of cleanup, water changes and filters. I'm not scraping algae off a lot of stuff, just the front display glass for the most part. Now, as I said, in this tank, I've got cherry shrimp, and there is Namano shrimp hidden somewhere in here. He's a pretty good sized guy, but he's pretty secretive. He loves to come out when it's dark. That's how most of my shrimp are in this tank. I think there's a little too much motion with the other fish, but they do a great job at that algae eating and cleaning up as well. So my last two residents of this tank are predatory, and they're little boogers at times. One of them is my peacock gudgeon. Now, I really love peacock gudgeons. They're pretty little fish. I had a pair of them, and it was two females, and sadly the other female passed some time back. But this one that I have left is still growing strong, and gorgeous fish. They will eat shrimplets. They may eat guppy fry, although I have guppies breeding in here pretty readily right now, and it doesn't even turn an eye to them. It doesn't care at all. It's all about fish food. It is one of my other pretty little fish that I have in here for the time being. So the last fish I have in here, they are notorious little murder beans, and that name alone will give it away for some of you. Pea pufferfish. This is the tank that I keep them in. Generally, they've been in here all winter. They live in my aquaponics setup most of the time, where there's enough tanks connected. I never run out of snails for them, so they just hop tank to tank. There's two of them in here right now. I had a group of them, but slowly some of them have been lost over the years, and I'm down to my last three. I'm going to pick up some more soon, and one of them is in my 5-gallon tank that I mentioned earlier. The other two are in here, and they are near impossible to see because they love to be little stalkers, and they will nip fins. A number of my male guppies in here have chunks taken out of their fins because they get nippy. You don't want to keep them with slow-moving fish or fish with big flowy tails, aka fancy guppies. So yeah, that is how things work right now. It's peaceful enough, but I will be getting them out soon to give everyone else a break. So the last tank is my 55-gallon oddball tank. This is in our office. Now, when it comes to filters for this tank, I have two Seachem Tidal 110s. They're a phenomenal filter. They're kind of the equivalent of a hang-on back sump. You can change out how much and what kind of media you've gotten them, and they do a great job. They have triple inputs on, or not inputs, inlets on them. They have the low input like you'd have on the bottom of a normal hang-on back filter. On the bottom of the motor, there are some slits where it will suck stuff in from the mid-water level, whereas the tube itself pulls in from the lower level. And then up at the top at the water line, they have a surface skimmer feature where they will also pull stuff in as well. Now, these filters are probably the Cadillac of hang-on back filters that I have found and used, and they're great. Again, the motor is submersed in the tank like these Aqueons are, but they have a lot better capabilities of what they can do, and they can clean a whole lot more than I feel these Aqueons can. Now they cost twice as much, but they're great filters. So the next thing I have for that tank is a top fin, I think it's 150 watt heater as well. It's done a great job for a long time. I think I've probably had it for nearly 10 years, and it's getting to the point I can tell its life expectancy is starting to get short because I can see some moisture building up in it, but they are a great quality heater. So I also have on that tank, there's a air stone buried in the sand behind the log that churns bubbles and helps circulate water in the tank and oxygenate the tank, as well as being powered by, it's a Tetra pump, if I remember correctly. I bought a number of them off of Amazon quite some time back, and they've done a fairly decent job for a while, but a lot of the bigger, or the biggest version of them I found, it just dies. It doesn't last so long. One side will go out. They're notorious for that if you read the reviews. So that's what I'm using for now. And the smaller ones I haven't had that much of an issue with, but the smaller ones are like one outlet. They've done a pretty decent job for me so far. So the last piece of equipment that I have on this tank upstairs is the Fluval Plant Spectrum 3.0. Now this is the Cadillac of lights. This light was 160 to 180 bucks. It does a great job. It's fully programmable with an iPhone app. You can choose what spectrum of light, what different colors of light you want. And honestly, for the tank it's on, it's way overkill. I'm growing Java fern in there. I don't need that much light. But my problem was I couldn't find an LED light that was dim enough that would be good for that without burning out my Java fern. So I swapped out this Hygger light with my Fluval light because the Hygger light was actually too bright on my tank upstairs and it was burning out my Java fern and killing it. Whereas switching them, I'm able to put the Hygger or Hugger, whatever you want to pronounce it, on this tank because it can use all the light it can get in here. I mean, everything's growing, everything's taking care of itself, and then I had the more controllable light on my other tank. So that should be the last piece of equipment for that tank. So now I get to talk about the fish. So the fish are, of course, one of my favorite parts. It's kind of an oddball community tank because that tank in the office is literally being used as a grow out for all my other tanks. I have a pretty weird assortment of fish that are in there. Some are permanent residents, some are moving through as they go on to bigger and better tanks. For starters, I'm going to talk about my Denison barbs. They're also called red line sharks. They're a gorgeous fish. They get about 6 inches long, black and silver with a beautiful red stripe on them. They've got a little bit of yellow to their eyes. They're active, they're fun. Now everything in this tank, they're kind of more the omnivore with a few predatory tendencies because anything small enough to fit in their mouth, they will. I can't breed guppies in that tank, that's for certain. They would all go to town on them. And these red line sharks are quick enough that they don't miss much. Like if it hits the water and they're going to go after it, they get it. Now my next fish for this tank is my electric blue acara. My electric blue acara is one of my personal favorites. I had a much larger one that passed away about a year ago, and I finally thought, you know, I want to get another one and grow it out. He's in this tank as well. He's about 1.5 inches long now, I think, and beautiful color. They're not a naturally occurring color variety you would find in the wild. They were bred genetically to have that color, and like any other cichlid, they can be peaceful, but they'll eat about anything that fits in their mouth. And when it comes to breeding, nothing like anything compares to a grumpy cichlid parent defending its fry. The next fish is my black ghost knifefish. So he's a temporary resident in this tank, and I planned on moving him to my 180 gallon when he gets enough size to him. If I threw him in now, he would be lunch for one of my bigger fish. But as I'm growing him out in this 55, he will do great. So black ghost knifefish are renowned kind of for their sensitivity to water quality. They're one of the fish that was actually used in testing water parameters at a lot of places to see if the quality of water is subpar up to standard, because the fish does not do well with bad quality water. Now, how they test that, I really don't know. That's just what I've read. Black ghost knife will hit almost 30 to 36 inches in length, and the bigger they get, the higher the chance of them eating anything else with them. It's not like they're terrible monsters, but anything that fits in their mouth, is kind of considered a snack. A lot of people will keep them with like angelfish because generally they don't pester their tank mates unless, as I said, it's small enough to be eaten. But people I've seen will keep them and they'll hand train them to come in and eat out of their hand, or they'll reach in and be able to pet them. And this is one of those fish that's very personable and a lot of people love. I don't recommend it unless you have a very large tank. As I said, they can reach about 3 feet in length. So the next fish I have on this list is my African brown knife. Now these guys are kind of peaceful but a little predatory, where the black ghost knife relies on like sensing electricity or electrical fields around them for sensing their environment because they're practically blind. The African brown knife is a much more visual small predator. They don't rely on the electrosensitivity that the black ghost knife does. And when he sees a little fish he wants, quick as an arrow and agile as can be, he goes after it. He gives those round sliding barbs a run for their money. They love heavily planted tanks, and they're just a unique looking fish. They may not be the prettiest, but they're fun to watch, and that's one of the reasons I love knife fish. My next fish is banjo catfish. Now I've got a trio, if not 4 of them in this tank, and you will hardly ever see them. I mean, I never see them all at once, unless I go in and flip on the light in the middle of the night. Now this is a very interesting catfish because they're not big on swimming. They walk on the bottom on their fins, and during the day, because they're very shy, they burrow themselves in the substrate. So they need to have like a sand substrate. And you'll never know they're there until you see just a little bit of the tail or the way a portion of their head and their eyes may stick out, because they're super secretive and they just like to be very well hidden. Now, as you've seen, I've got one in here that just is very fat, and I don't know if it's a big boy or a big girl, but every time food hits the water, day or night, this one banjo catfish is always out and about looking for food. So the next fish I'm going to talk about in this tank is my spotted Raphael catfish. These guys will hit about 6 inches in length, and I think they're a gorgeous catfish, black with those spots on them. They're supposedly predatory to anything small enough that can be eaten, but they are a catfish, so don't be surprised by that. Mine are pellet trained, and I've got a couple of them. The younger ones are very much all about coming out and about to eat anytime food hits the water. The larger one that I've got is pretty lazy, and he sticks his head out of his hole just long enough to suck food in his mouth, then backs in. The big one I've had for at least 6 years, and they're one of those fish that you will never see because they hide all day and only come out in the pitch black to look for food. So it's kind of hard to feed some of these catfish because they're so shy. I have to do it at night. So the next fish I've got is a trio of Plecostomus. They're all different species. My first one is a bristlenose pleco. She is a female. I think she's about 3.5 inches long. Very personable, climbs about the tank most of the time, can be shy, but when food hits the water, she's all about it. She's all after it. Loves algae wafers. Plecostomus are the sucker fish, catfish, and so a lot of times you'll see them like stuck to the side of the glass as they go to eat. And they're a really cool species. You have to be careful of which one you get because some of them are actually carnivorous. Some of them eat more vegetables. My second one, my clown Plecostomus, is actually one that rasps and eats wood. So this beautiful tree trunk that I've had in my tank has slowly been getting whittled away over the past 3 or 4 years as this Plecostomus is dining and eating on this wood. Okay, so my last Plecostomus is an L205. I don't remember the full Latin name for it, but there's so many species of Plecostomus out there that if you Google this, like L205 Plecostomus, it'll bring up a picture, it'll bring up the name. That's how all Plecostomus are, because there's so many species of them that are still being discovered even in South America. Cool catfish. I got it by chance because I realized at the pet store I saw what it was and I said, you are not the right thing. I was like, this is clearly labeled incorrectly, and the pet store guy, he didn't really care too much. He's like, oh, we get them in, I'll sell it to you for this price. So I got that one as well, just because it was something different than what you normally see. So I have one more catfish I'm going to describe to you really quick, and this one is the Farluella catfish, or twig or stick catfish. Super peaceful, likes to eat algae, maybe decaying plant matter. I don't mind having some of these fish in this tank that eat decaying plant matter, simply because as some of my Java fern is kind of dying and growing new leaves, those old leaves, instead of me having to throw them away, become food for some of the fish in here as they will eat them. Now, these fish, as I said, aren't big on trying to kill live plants. They will eat some of the decaying and dying stuff though, so circle of life. So the last fish for this tank is my rainbow wolffish. Now this is probably the riskiest fish that I put in this aquarium. Rainbow wolffish are the smallest of a very large species down in South America. If you've ever watched Jeremy Wade in River Monsters, he catches a enormous wolffish. I don't remember exactly which species it is, but everyone's terrified of piranhas, thinking, oh, they have such terrible teeth and they're so nasty tempered. Piranhas, like, they don't even hold a candle to some of these wolffish of South America. These guys have the teeth, the size, and the attitude to really mess stuff up. Now, the red wolffish is the smallest species of these. They're nearly bulletproof as long as they don't get tore up or in a fight with something else, and they'll eat about anything. From like day one, both of mine have been really great about taking to pellets. Now, the reason I have two, but I only have one in this tank, is when I bought the pair, the first one, I'm going to call the first one a male because he was a big chunky boy. He was very aggressive to the other one, and he was forcing her, because I call her a girl, into hiding, and he was hogging all the food and chasing the other one around, so I separated them so I could grow them both out. The big guy is about ready to go on my 180 gallon. But this little female is peaceful and timid enough. I thought, you know, I'm going to try putting her in this community tank in the office and growing her out there. And if she doesn't cause any problems, great. I'll let her stay for as long as I feel comfortable. When she gets big enough, she gets to go on the 180 gallon as well. So right now she is living happily and healthily in this 55 gallon tank upstairs and doing a great job. So I'm excited to move her into the 180 gallon when that day comes, but until then, she gets to chill and relax with the other oddball fish in my office tank. So I hope this has been a good learning experience for you. I've tried to throw all these names up, give you the list of equipment that I recommend, and if you are interested, I hope you're able to look some of this up and find what will work for you and what will work for your tank. I hope this time we've talked about the fish has been good as well. I love to give options and research any and all of them. I didn't go anywhere near as in depth as I would like to on some of these fish, but this is just a breakdown of what I have in my tanks, so you guys can kind of get those sparks going in your brain and get a little bit of excitement to start thinking what you may be interested in. You've got your community fish, you've got your semi-aggressive fish, you've got your aggressive fish like the wolffish. There's a ton of neat, cool options out there, and a lot of these fish have a special place in my heart for one reason or another, for many different things that they do, and they're all cool and unique fish. So I hope this has been a good day for you, just diving in and learning about this lesson. And thanks for watching. So I'll see you later on Deep Water Tanks.